Onto the war on terrorism, Belgian prosecutors are charging 2 more suspects in connection to the attacks on Brussels last month. Joining us right now is former NATO commander and former 4-star Navy Admiral James Stavridis and Fox News correspondent and former intelligence operator Gabrielle. Good to see you both. Thanks so much for joining us. Admiral, let me kick it off with you. What's your take in terms of where we are in this Brussels investigation?
Well, I think we're still at the beginning in a lot of ways because this is going to spread much across Europe. And let's face it, it's because of the flow of the jihadis coming out of Syria, coming out of Libya, many of them holding European Union passports. Little cooperation even today between the various European states on this. At the end of the day, the investigation will tumble on, Maria, but sooner or later we're going to have to deal not only with these symptoms in Europe, but actually go to the cause and deal with this in Syria.
And of course, this has become an election issue as well. You're a former NATO commander. Donald Trump recently took aim at NATO, you know this, saying that NATO is obsolete. You say it's anything but that.
Well, I wouldn't tell Mr. Trump how to run a hotel, but I will say NATO continues to be highly relevant for the United States. They have stood with us and fought with us in Afghanistan, Libya, the Balkans, Syria, piracy. They're good allies. We need to get them to raise their spending a bit, but there is no way we should be walking away from NATO in a period like this.
Gabrielle, your thoughts?
Well, I think that, when you hear politicians use strong language, sometimes it's sort of the voice of what people want to hear because they're angry and they're upset. But you have people like Admiral Stavridis who has dedicated his entire life to serving our country and knows, and actually, really knows what we need to do to make our country stronger. And I think that we really need to be careful what we're hearing from politicians right now in this election process to make sure that we're, balancing that against what people like Admiral Stavridis and people who have served our country for so long have to say.
Yeah, for sure. One of the top stories in the Journal this morning, I want to ask you about it, Leah, and that is Boeing reportedly meeting with Iranian airlines regarding doing business in the country. Is this the best move for an American staple like Boeing? This is the top story in the Journal. They're in talks to sell planes to Iran. It would be one of the top deals between a U.S. company and Tehran.
Well, I think for Boeing, it's great. I mean, there's a huge opportunity in Iran right now to develop its airlines. Iran has been isolated. It has not developed its airline program for years. It's a very old and tired fleet. Back in January, Iran announced a deal to buy 118 planes from Airbus, which is Boeing's greatest rival. So I think when you look at it from a company perspective, it's an important thing to do. But I also think when you look at trade relations and what they do for diplomatic relations, that's an important aspect to consider as well.
Does it make it harder for the United States to slam sanctions back on Iran or to crack down on Iran if they violate any of the terms of this agreement that we laid out? When we have commercial interests tied together, how do we force them to stick by their word?
Well, first, I think you have to keep this in perspective. Boeing received a license in February to go and have basically discussions with Iran about this. They're not selling planes yet. That would require further license at this point. They're also not talking about tech transfer, transferring technology. It's, selling planes, not giving them the technology to build their own. But to your point, and, slapping sanctions back on, I think sometimes you have to give countries something to lose. And I think that that's kind of what's going on here. When you look at American soft power and you look at sanctions, that soft power, it's a carrot on a stick. You have to have the carrot on the stick in order to dangle it.
But who's got more to lose here? If we've got, if we're selling them a lot of airplanes, do we feel like we have more to lose if we try to slap sanctions?
It really depends on how you look at it. I mean, if you look at it in terms of trying to slap sanctions back on, those opportunities are there. But if you look at it in terms of, an American business doing a good deal, that's something to be said. But also the issue of, wanting to kind of reopen the communications line between people in Iran and people in Western countries. I think the best way to sell people on Western values is to give them the opportunity to travel to Western countries. So if you improve an airline in a country like Iran and people are actually allowed to travel and to do business around the world, I think that's the best way to let them see American and Western values.
If they are allowed to travel. Admiral, what's your take on this in terms of Boeing trying to get a real foothold in Iran?
I think you need to put it in perspective that if we don't sell those airplanes, our European competitors are going to do so. Having taken away the overall global sanctions against Iran, at this point, I think the balance, although a close one, is to make the sale. On the other hand, we've got to be clear-eyed about what Iran's going to do with the money and the profits that come from this. They're going to continue to destabilize the region. So it's a mixed picture, but on balance, I think Leia's got it about right.
Yeah, these are hard discussions. Admiral, let me get your take on the 2016 election. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs encouraging the military to stay out of the race. Your thoughts?
I agree with that. I think that one of the great strengths of this republic is the fact that our active duty military are apolitical. They do not get into politics. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Joe Dunford, graduate of the Fletcher School, where I'm currently the dean, is very wise to make that kind of advice and guidance clear to the active duty force. It's critical to have that separation between civilian authority and the active duty military.
Especially since this week, Leah, we heard that, you know, there was a comment that, look, we're not going to listen to Donald Trump if, in fact, he tells us to do something like carpet bombing or something, you know, that is not in step with what the military thinks is appropriate.
Right. You know, as the Admiral was saying, you know, the last thing the military wants to do is to put a block between the American people and the military, or between people who may lead the military at some point in the future and the military. So it's important to keep that separation. But at the same time, you know, as we watch this current election process, politicians are saying things. People who are running for president right now are saying things that may not be the best thing for our country, may not be the best thing for our military. It's frustrating to people who are serving right now because they cannot have their voice heard about what is actually correct, and that's why it's so important to listen to the people who have served and who have dedicated their lives to serving our country, to really be able to separate the wheat from the chaff here.
Yeah.